Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we get together in the middle of the week to learn more about technology. Today's speaker is, as Gabe was our Apple person and Bill's our Microsoft person, we have our own genealogy person, Sue Mueller, who comes to us from the Erie Computer Group, where she is piled high with snow, is here again to share her vast knowledge of genealogy. I wish I had the time to put to use all that she has shared with us. Today she has a very unique presentation, which is something that's going to be very helpful because a similar experience. I'm a retired teacher. I taught first grade, and 20 years later, a first grader girl comes up to me and says, "Hi," and I'm trying to go, "Who is this?" And so I've learned to ask, who did I know you were back in the days? Because she's obviously changed. Sue is here to tell us how we can find ancestry information on females, because going through name changes can cause us a lot of trouble trying to find. So I'm going to turn over to Sue, and be careful and say that this isn't a workshop on finding females. This is a workshop on searching for your female ancestry information. Sounds better that way. So Sue, all over to you.
Okay. Let's see, slideshow. We're going to talk about strategies and sites to find your female ancestors today. I'm going to talk about research strategies and the importance of finding all daughters and children in the entire family, the best records for maybe finding what you're looking for, and some specific websites. And I do focus on the free websites that you can find. And I know some of you hate social media, but it can be very helpful. But your most important asset as a genealogist is tenacity. Okay, females present all kinds of problems because prior to the 20th century, most historical records were for and about men. In fact, British common law said that when people married, they became one, and of course the one was the man. Property is usually under the man's name. Men ran the businesses and government, and women were subject to the control of men. And the further back you try to research, the more difficult it becomes. So some important strategies: know your names, and that means the entire names for everybody in the family. A timeline can be very useful. If you're lucky enough to still have family members who are older than you who might have information, talk to them. Make sure you look at the entire record, and so finding the original record where possible is very important. And always investigate associates. If you're lucky enough to have diaries and letters, then read the whole thing. In fact, you know, when you're looking at newspapers, it's always good to just sit down and read those old historical newspapers. So the names are very important. Check those names in sibling obituaries and birth notices, death certificates. Note the entire names of husbands, children, and her siblings. And if there are some unusual middle names or spellings, that may be of significance. So there are naming patterns within a family itself. Sometimes they're based on culture or ethnicity, almost rules of the way you name your children. Obviously, if you can find a brother, that's going to provide you with a maiden name. And you find brothers in obituaries, death certificates, notices after a death in the family, sometimes thank you notes. A brother or a mother might be living in the household, so that you will find that on a census. And remember that even though relationships started on the census in 1880, they were not always correct when you're getting away from cousins or brother-in-law or that kind of thing. So investigate the names of other people who are in the household just to make sure how they're related. And then the historical perspective is going to have an importance be important on names, because we went through a whole series of times where people were named after famous people. It was not uncommon for a woman to use her maiden name as a first name or a middle name for a child. So research these as possible family relationships. Some nationalities had a naming pattern tradition. They might use for the first name of a specific ancestor, a father-in-law, so on. So investigate the pattern if you have a specific nationality. If there was a specific pattern, that might help you with the names. If you're lucky enough to have people to talk to, you might be the oldest person in your family. I'm at that point. Well, I'm next to the oldest. But the things that you want to ask those individuals are, about the maiden name, how they met their husbands, interview other relatives, neighbors, friends, and anything that was unusual. And now we're lucky enough that you don't have to depend on your memory when you interview somebody. You have a nice recording device right in your hot little hand. Cemetery records are better than the cemetery, but if you can't get to the cemetery records, and sometimes even finding out who has those for some of the older cemeteries is difficult to find. But the woman's tombstone may have information on it. But start a big circle and walk around that tombstone and see who is in that area. They may be family members. That's why if you have a GPS on a cemetery, you can get an idea of who's around it, who's buried around her. If you're lucky enough to have a cemetery book, those that are in cemetery order are a lot better than the ones that are in alphabetical order. Church records, in case of a marriage, you're going to have, you will find the information. But look at the names of the witnesses on any of those documents: a baptism, a death, a marriage. Who are they? Are they just friends? Were they business associates, or are they family members? That's why it's so important to look at the original document wherever possible. In the cemetery records, you can usually see a plot map. Some of the larger cemeteries may actually have a map online, and you can see who is where. But who purchased that? When was it purchased? Or what graves were purchased together? Obviously, that's going to give you an idea for family members. The cemetery records themselves may have the exact date of birth or death, even if it's not on the stone. Sometimes there will be a spouse name in the records. There will be other information in the records. So if you can see the cemetery records, it's better than just a walk around the cemetery. And a lot of those old cemetery books, if you're into an old cemetery, they're very large. They can't even put them on the copier if they were so inclined to do that. They will usually allow you to take a picture with your phone. So ask. But it's not that they don't want to copy it for you, but they just physically couldn't do it. As you look at the children buried around someone, you might be able to figure out a marriage date, at least based on the birth of the children. That will give you a time to look. Basically, marriage records, most states started before 1900, usually at the county level, but churches were keeping records way back before that. If you see a lot of tombstones with deaths over a short period of time, that may be evidence of an epidemic or flu or flood or some disaster. But look around and see who those people are in the adjoining and surrounding plots, and they may be family members, and they may give you a clue about name. A woman typically did not leave a will herself, but if she were widowed or unmarried, it's possible, and owned something, it's possible that she had a will. She could be named in her father or her husband's or somebody else's will. And I don't know if you're aware that Family Search now has a what they're calling a labs link, where they are trying some new things out, and with the idea that if people like it, they're going to do it. And they are starting to index some wills, all the names in a will. Right now, most of the indexing is just the person whose will we're talking about. Divorce records, which you're less likely to find online, but a person could have filed for divorce even though there was no divorce, so that might offer some kind of clue. Orphan court or guardianship records. Some states are called orphan courts, some cases they're guardianship. Those can be very valuable for finding. Since women didn't technically own the children, if you will, if the husband died, it was often a brother who ended up being the guardian of the children. So that's worth taking a look. And usually orphan court or guardianship records do have an index book. So you don't have to wade through pages and pages, even though they're not indexed. Land records, women in the 1700s and 1800s did not usually own land, but they could be named in deeds. That's where this new indexing that Family Search is doing can be helpful. A married woman may have to sign a release of a dower if the land came to him as a result of the marriage. So she might have to sign off on that. That may give her father's name there, or where she got the land from. If you see a small price on a realty transfer, and I know it's hard for us to judge what's a small price because we're looking at $1 million homes, and that's, way back when that a big house might have sold for hundreds of dollars rather than tens of thousands. But if there's a transfer for a relatively small sum, it may indicate that it was a family transfer. And neighbors, people tended to move, settle, be where near people who were like them, and they may be family members. Birth, marriage, and death records. Marriages are the best probably source, because there's an application once the state county got involved, and a license. There's a certificate. It had to be returned. There's a church register. There's the marriage bans. There's a bond. There may be a newspaper announcement. And once you look at the entire record, there are witness names there, and they may be family members. And once we get into the 1900s, of course, that they might have an entire article about the wedding or the engagement. That's very rich once the newspapers were the vital line to news in the community. Death records may name the father. Remember, though, people don't always know the right answer. So that's why you may see biological siblings who have mothers with different maiden names. It's what the person who's giving the information on the document thinks he or she knows. And you have to also remember that when someone dies, I like to think that the remaining people are upset. And even if they know the information, they may not be able to provide it correctly. So look at who the informant was and judge whether that informant might know the right information. But the maiden name is often provided there. If your woman received a military pension, then she had to prove that she was married to be able to get that pension. So those things you might find those in the records. And then the children are often listed on the application, which can confirm that you've got the right family. And family members may be witnesses, so those names as witnesses might need investigation. Because by the time you're looking at land records and military pensions and those kind of things, you've already hit your brick wall and you're you're struggling to figure something out. So you're gonna be looking at as many documents as you can. Immigration records, well, what exists and how to find it depends on when your immigrant ancestor arrived and when and how he or she, and we're talking about she's today, became a citizen. So the immigration and information is on the census. Your handout is going to have a little list of what years you can find what information on. And that can help you judge when somebody came into the country. And I'm hoping and praying that your ancestors came in after 1906. And I will tell you why that's important shortly. Ship manifests can be helpful, providing that your person came in legitimately. And births and deaths, by the way, are usually listed at the back of a manifest. So if that's something you need to look at, remember you need to look at more than one place. And by the way, even though when you're searching, they provide you with a link to a page, those documents were 2 pages. They were large books. So, and depending on how they were scanned, whether they were scanned from front to back or back to front, you may either have to go forward or backward to see the other page. So don't give up when you just see one page, because there's a whole other page and they're in a line. They don't repeat the name again. You're going to have to line up the 2 pages to see what pertains or the number line to your ancestor. So I know you'll be surprised to learn the passenger lists were first required as early as 1820. Unfortunately, on those early records, it was usually a family unit. So you may get names and, wife, the word wife and 2 children rather than the family unit that you're looking for. But they became more detailed as the years rolled on. And remember, not everybody came in to the country through the port of New York. While that may be the most famous place, they came in lots of other places. So compare the names, location information, dates with later family records. And by the way, when I'm searching for immigration records, I usually do not limit by country, because what happens is the list, they use ditto marks. And sometimes if an Italian jumped in with a bunch of Irishmen, that he just gets listed as Irish on the way in because they're using the ditto marks. So it's not always correct. So in 1893, they added 16 new fields on the passenger list, and they were the final destination, which can be important, marital status, where they lived last, whether they were literate or not, and their financial status. And they had to, in general, have $25 to be able to enter the country. But in 1906, this is why I told you I wanted your ancestors to have come after 1906. They were required to include a physical description. Well, that's not too important, because I'm 5 foot tall. Somebody's 5'6" actually looks tall to me. So if I were the person making the information, I would be starting to list people who are tall that you might, as a 6-footer, think is a short person. And that's the way the physical description is: dark, tall, short, those kinds of things. So that's not really very helpful. Place of birth, though, oh yeah, that's going to be pretty important. And then the name and address of the closest living relative where the person is coming from. What? Oh, that's a really good one. And then who and where they're going in the United States, their destination, and it asks about a relationship too. So that's why 1906 forward can be so great. I do not recommend that you try to search on the Ellis Island site. There's a lot better place to search, and it's a one-step search engine on stevemorse.org. And you can search Ellis Island Castle Garden records together. And you can search other ports of entry. Most of the links are to free sites, but any of the ones that are subscription or the pay sites are all to Ancestry. He offers other things on this. It's a great site to look at. The big thing is that you used to be able to search by Soundex on Ellis Island, and that's a name that sounds like another name. And you can't do that anymore. And a lot of those ethnic names were misspelled, depending on who filled out the form. So using the exact right spelling might not be helpful. The Soundex sounds like you can search by just the first couple of letters. So it's a lot better. There were restrictions on women entering the United States. If there was somebody who was unmarried mothers and single women, they were thought usually to be a woman of ill repute, and we didn't want those people in our country. In some cases, there were marriages right on Ellis Island so that women could come into the country. Until 1922, a wife was automatically naturalized with her husband. But guess what? She would be usually unnamed or just Mrs. So-and-so. So that's not very helpful to you with your search. And I love it when a woman marries a man with the same surname. That makes things even more fun. Unmarried women rarely tried to have naturalization on their own. But after 1922, there were separate records for married women. They did not usually have the maiden name on them, however. A woman lost her citizenship in 1907 if she married somebody who was an alien or somebody who was not a citizen. That law was repealed in 1922, but it didn't automatically grandfather people in to get their citizenship back. They had to apply for that starting in 1936, and then they did that until 1960. So newspapers. When you do the newspaper, start with, if you know the date, start around the date that you know. But I want to remind you that a lot of this small town newspapers and some of the larger ones had a feature in there of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. So after you've looked and haven't found something, then try a search where you broaden the date, because it may be, you may find the article. When someone in the 1900s, this would be primarily, when somebody became engaged, there's a lot of details there, a lot of information about the wedding, including who attended. Remember, this was the vehicle where people got their information, and all the details were put in there. There may be, anniversary announcements, which should include the maiden name in it. Divorce notices, just the filing was usually in the newspaper. So start with the dates and then broaden your search if you don't find something, because you may find a feature from the former papers. The society columns are great. If somebody visits their sick mother or father, that could be in the newspaper, and that may give you a maiden name. Attendees at a funeral are listed where they came from, might give you a possible listing for family members. And then several weeks after the funeral was held, there's often a thank you note in the newspaper thanking people who helped out after the funeral or whatever. And it may list the names of all the children or brothers or who was responsible for, and that can give you some names. And then after death, legal notices too. So don't stop your search with the date of death. And then you start looking for obituaries of siblings and children and parents to see what you can find in those, because sometimes you hit the mother lode. So if you're looking for an obituary, well, in the 1800s, harder to find for women, but it may be Mrs. John Jones. So use the husband's name if you to search. It may be just his initials. At one time, that popularity went into probably the early 1920s. So combine a maiden name if you have one, and then a married surname to see what you can find in the newspapers. You know, you can make the finding of those close together on the search, and you might hit some more information. Search for surviving children and siblings, read their obituaries, try the name of the cemetery, look for surnames in the cemetery. Remember nicknames. I've got a link in the handout for female nicknames. Sometimes people were, called one census by a nickname, and even the women sometimes in the census were listed by initials. So look at the census and see what you can find. You may end up in, whoops, didn't need to go back. Using the land records, some indirect records to find something. Your best bet is going to be a marriage record and following your children. The cemetery. When you come up with a hypothesis, some of those county history books, they're not sourced, but they've got a name in there. Research that, see if that works, unusual children names. And then keep a chart and see the names that you've tried as a maiden name and whether they work out. It's very frustrating because before 1850, everybody's not named on the census. And you're just seeing a family unit to try and figure out whether your gal was a member of that family. Marriage records are going to be the most likely to contain the maiden name. So start your search in the county of the birth of her children and see what you can find. On the children, when the children were born, there's some birth records. Most states didn't start keeping birth records till around 1900. And they're the generally accepted standard for releasing those records is 105 years. Although not everybody, it's not a law. So you may get some information on a birth certificate. Obviously, if that's filled out by the parents, you're more likely to be correct than anything else you can find. I mentioned before the marriage bonds or bands. Historical newspapers, depending on the time period. The male attendants might give you a clue to they might not be friends of the groom, they might be brothers of the bride. I think I mentioned walking the cemetery and looking at nearby plots. The records are more important than the cemetery itself because there may be nearby graves without headstones. And you won't know they're there. In fact, some headstones you can't read and some are fallen over too. So if you can get access to the records, that's better. Where else might you look? I mentioned the county history books. They're not sourced, and the family history books are generally not sourced, but the family history books are probably more accurate than the county histories, because the county histories were often, they sold back to people in the county. So, you know, if your name was in the book, you're more likely to want to buy it. So they tried to put as many people's names in it as possible. The family history books, people generally brought their Bibles and their information to the family reunion, and somebody took charge of that. So it was, the information was sourced. They just didn't put it in the book. City directories can help you find family units, but remember that city directories are not listed. They're listed, people are listed in alphabetical order, not in household order, although they may have two different sections and they may have households together. If you can find church member lists, that can help you find things. Institutional records, not always available online, but they may be helpful. If you knew your gal was in a certain kind of club or organization or sisterhood, that can be helpful. Some of those are starting to come online. If the family moved from one place to another, it's possible, but there might be more information in a newspaper from a former town. And if that town particularly is in another state, and you restrict your search to, you know, the state where you know she died, you're going to miss it. So every time you hit a brick wall, broaden your search and see what you can find. And the obituaries were not always exactly the same from place to place. So you want to look at it in multiple places and see what you find. Now they're pretty standard, where the funeral home does them or the people themselves do them, and that's what's published, if it's published at all. Remember that any scanning that's done of books or documents now is all done by machine. Optical character recognition technology is not 100% accurate, and the quality of the original copy obviously influences how accurate it can be too. It's fun to read the newspaper. I have a large monitor and I just turn it 90 degrees when I'm reading a newspaper so I can see the whole page. Old newspapers without pictures are hard to read. The headlines, well, there aren't headlines on articles. There's not a little section that says these are the obituaries, folks. So this information might be in a little column of musings from a certain area. So that's why looking at the newspaper and reading it can be helpful. Look beyond the direct ancestors and research the other family members. I mentioned before the father's probate, land, and court records, and they're indexing more of those and more of what's in those records. Research any of the known children. You can search without a name. You don't need to have a first name to search. You can search death certificates by parent names, and then maybe find brothers, sisters, whatever. In the father's probate, and even if he died without a will, if he owned property, there's going to be estate distribution. See how the daughters are named. They may be named by married name, which will obviously help you very much. If in the estate records, it lists who got something with a name, and those records can be helpful to you, not always indexed, although I mentioned before the Family Search is starting to index the entire record. So there are separate estate records, and there are separate, if somebody dies with a will, probate records. And usually those books, they're not in alphabetical order. They're grouped together by last name, the first letter of the last name, and then the first letter of the first name. And then they're basically chronological, but they usually do have an index book. And and those index books are online. And you can then look through the index book, find the person's name, and it'll give you the page number and what book it's in to find the will. And if the father died without a will, then the land would be divided according to current inheritance law. So every person who was an heir would have to sign off on the selling of the land. And if the daughter's married, they're listed by married names. So you have to have some starting point, obviously. Always research everybody in the family, obituaries, whatever you can. The family history books are great. A lot of those were printed in the early 1900s, so they're out of copyright, and you can find those on places like archive.org. You don't have to know the name of the person. You can, anything that's indexed, you can search by. So I mentioned parent names. If you know where somebody died, you can search by place name and you have an exact date without a name because something was indexed incorrectly. Anything that they have indexed, you can search by. I've searched censuses by age and sex and location without knowing a name. I had a first name, but she didn't go by the first name. I eventually, I found it, but it was tricky. It was in a place where they only had 21 pages of census records. Thank you. So I use an example of Pennsylvania death certificates. Those things are indexed. You can search by them. But see over here, it tells you the year and the certificate number. Those things were not indexed. So yes, you can search by certificate number, but you have to page through the documents to find it. But I've been known to do that too. I mentioned before about birth certificates, the generally accepted standard, 105 years, death certificates, 50 years, marriage records, wills and probate and deeds are a public record. Those are only suggested genealogical standards. They're generally accepted. Doesn't mean that's what your state does. But by law, census records become available 72 years after, and they use April the 1st as the date. Military records is 62 years after the discharge of the person. That doesn't mean they're automatically released, but it does mean that they're public record. And if you want somebody's military records, you don't have to show that you're related if they're earlier than that. I mentioned before that there's only names on the census up through 1840, but there is one nice thing on the 1840 census. Anybody who received a Revolutionary War military pension, and that would include your women, is listed by name on the form separate. So you can search that way and you might get lucky. There were mortality schedules from 1850 to 1880. The only thing that's wrong with those is you had to have died within the year before the census. So it's not the 10 years between censuses. You didn't get lucky like that. And that usually has the cause of death, may have a maiden name on there. And I mentioned that in 1880, that's when the relationships are on the census, but they're not always correct when you're getting beyond mother, father, brother, sister. So you want to look at the original document. There could be in-laws living with family, and sometimes they're listed as boarders, even though they were family members. So that can be frustrating. But look through the pages to see who lived close. Are they possible relatives? In the 1900 and the 1910 census, they ask questions about marriage. You can figure out the marriage year, and then how many children living, or children birthed by this woman, and then how many living. So that can be helpful. How many times have I said, look at the original document? Yes, you need to do that. Multi-generations often lived in one household. They may be listed incorrectly as far as a relationship, but unknowns could be related to the wife and might give you a clue for a maiden name. City directories, this will help you locate families, provide information about occupation, which might give you another place to search. It'll give you some community background information. Sometimes they have an annual death index. If you're trying to figure out what church your family went to, particularly if it's ethnic, you can probably figure that out in a city directory because people generally went to a church that was close by. And then you try to figure out where those darn records might be. But I mentioned that the city directories are not in family unit groupings. So here you can see two people living at 923 East 10th. It's Thomas and Ann, and they're not close together there. And I just circled this widow of Daniel because this is something freakish that the indexing of the city directories has done is they will put Daniel in the index. So if you're only looking at the index for this, it appears as if he's still alive, but he's not. So places which you shouldn't look on are the 1850 census is probably going to be not too helpful for you. And early wills, your gal probably didn't have one. And early land records aren't going to be very productive. And women didn't actually serve in the military until after 1890. So some good places to look, and these are all will be on your handout. And I'll talk a little bit about the sites. Find a Grave is great. It's worldwide. They have over 250 million grave records, and you can browse by cemetery. And sometimes people have posted interesting things on that site. So you might find family photos or photos of the headstone, all kinds of good stuff. That's what you can also search by maiden name if you have it. So, and then, if you have a name like Schaefer in your family, you got to search every spelling that you ever thought of for that. It's very frustrating. Cindy's List, all kinds of good stuff about women. She has links to both free and paid sources, so it's not all free, though using her site is free. It's like a great big card catalog. Family Search is doing a lot of great things, and has been changing every day of what they have. You can search by when a collection has been added. So if you looked for something 2 years ago and didn't find it, and nothing's been added since then, you don't want to look there. So you might want to sort collections that way. If you use the catalog search or the historical images, and historical images they're not pictures of people and things, they're pictures of documents. It's like the catalog records, the things that haven't been indexed, but everything there is viewable. In the catalog records, not everything is viewable, and that's frustrating when you're using that. But I mentioned before the experimental labs. And right now, the experimental labs, this is a pull down, what you get when you search, is not listed there. I put a link to where you can find it, or you can roll down to the bottom of this web page, and on the far right, there's a link to the labs. But the default is the red to search records. The catalog is easier to search, but the images you can see everything. So it's a crapshoot right now. If you're doing a catalog search, you want to start with a location. And even though they write, the way they have it indexed is USA, Pennsylvania, Armstrong, you can put it in the traditional way and they'll find it. and then they list the categories, and then you have to click on each one. It's not really user friendly. And then of course the frustrating thing is when you can't see the documents sometimes. They're generally they haven't been indexed yet. They're handwritten pages, although the AI now is doing a lot better with handwritten pages. I mentioned before that probate records usually have an index book. So do the guardianship records. And the index book could be indexed on Ancestry, and then they send you to Family Search to see the whole document. But this is going to be a game changer. This is features that aren't ready for public release, that if people like them, they're going to people are clamoring for some of these things. Right now, they have the ones I thought you might be interested in are the finding help with an AI search. Remember, AI doesn't do your work, but it'll tell you how to do your work. But the expanded search with full text, where they're taking documents and indexing the whole document, is going to be a game changer. They now have an area where you can do a tree where nobody can make changes in it, where it's not on the one world tree. I really haven't looked at that. And then they have family group trees where you can share with relatives. So you might want to take a look at and that's changing every day. I looked within the last week to do this slide, but that had changed since I did a family search program last month, and it changed. This is a great site that I'm sure most people here have never heard of. It is the gal that runs this site is a Daughters of the American Revolution person, and she is helping you to do your application for that. It's totally free. Her links are all to free stuff, and there's some incredible things on here, and you don't have to be doing a DAR application to do it. This is what it looks like, and if you go to New England Records, it's by the town, but you can find all kinds of links to good stuff here. There's a World Gen Web project in addition to the US one. It's broken down depending on, this obviously is US, and I picked Pennsylvania, and it depends on who's running the site, what you're going to find. So it's not, I can't tell you what you're going to find there. It's a crapshoot. So you might find good stuff there. You might find nothing. There's a site called Reclaim the Records, which is a not-for-profit group of genealogists and historians and researchers who think there are certain genealogical records that should be online and aren't available to the public. So they use freedom of information laws to sue the government agencies to release these records, and then they digitize them and put them online. And it's weird what they have there, so you're just going to have to take a look at the site and see. Sometimes they put them on other websites, like the New York birth, marriage, and death records are digitized on archive.org. I love libraries. Libraries across the nation can be your friend. And that could be a city, county, or a university library. University libraries are the ones that are trying to digitize the newspapers primarily. And that could be where your ancestors settled, or that could be your own library where you live right now. They generally have links to genealogy sites. Sometimes they have free things you can use online. Some of their resources are, you have to have a library card to access them. So I can't tell you that every library has X, but check them out. So I have a place where you can find libraries. And then the Chronicling America site, which is a newspaper site of the Library of Congress, they have an index of sources for newspaper holdings, and they can tell you what format the newspaper is in and where you can find it. So whether it's print or microfilm or that kind of stuff. So that can be helpful if you find that there's a newspaper you want to look at. And if there's some newspapers that are on Chronicling America, and they have a pretty incredible search engine. One of the best for finding things. Historical societies, here's one from corner of Erie County, and they have a collection of marriage records that you can search. So that can be very helpful. Be sure to check your historical societies, your genealogical societies, where your ancestors settled, and see what you can find. Don't give up on Facebook, because there are people there that will help you. And if you're too cheap to subscribe to some resource, you might be able to get somebody to look something up for you. And they can give you advice. If you're going to go do some research in a certain area and you haven't been there in 50 years, somebody who lives there now is more likely to be able to help you with upfront to get ready for your visit than what you remember. And I mentioned that tenacity is going to be one of your most important assets. And Thomas Edison said, our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is to always to try just one more time. And that's all she wrote.
That's just amazing. I just tell my wife, you know, you've got this vast knowledge. I said, it's amazing what you put together. It just makes my mind go, wow, I'd like to get started on this, but
oh, you will, you go down the rabbit hole and never come out.
well, I can't go down that rabbit hole because I'm down the APCUG Zoom rabbit hole.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yep.
I love her presentations. I was going to do this when I retired, and I found out both sides of my family are completely done. And I thought, oh, well, such for a new hobby. Think of something.
Well, but are they accurate?
I would assume so, because one is they're both run by Mormons. And they have access to so much stuff. And yet neither of my one of my parents was a Mormon, my mother, and didn't continue on. And my dad wasn't. It's their siblings that have done this, one of them in Idaho. And my youngest daughter sent me an email and she said, who do you think this looks like? Hello. And I said, and it was a profile of a bride with a veil down like this. And I said, she has our nose. Somebody had sent it to her and said, is it you? She said, no. But she had our nose. On my mother's side, aha, uncle up in Idaho, Jack Randall. Well, that's apparently not really his name. It's Horace John. But I found him instantly, and there was the nose. And I clicked on him, I clicked on his kids, and instantly I knew all the back knowledge of these relatives that I personally have not seen since I'm a little kid. And it's all due to Sue's presentations and how she says, you know, you get on a roll and you just keep on going and the information is there. And it was so easy to do. And I thought I had so much fun. So if you're new to genealogy, I just say, give it a go for sure.
Yes,
absolutely.
I'm looking at the chat now. Somebody asks, is Find a Grave reliable? Find a Grave is done by volunteers, so no, and nothing's 100% reliable, unfortunately. You can even take a picture and put it in the wrong cemetery, and you're going to say to me, no, how is that possible? Well, I'll give you an example. There's a very large cemetery down in Meadville, and as you walk through it in one section, you walk back and you enter the Catholic cemetery. There is no fence or anything that tells, voila, you just left Greenwood and now you're going into St. Aggie's. So that's possible. And then there are cemeteries almost side by side that have similar names. And if you're taking pictures and you don't say I'm leaving X cemetery and going into the next one, you may place something incorrectly that way. So even things with a picture could be placed in the wrong cemetery.
You, Joel Owens, you're on. Oh, you don't have your hand raised. You're just at the beginning of my stream here. Do we have any questions, any comments?
Again, somebody asked where orphan court and guardianship records are found. Family Search probably has the best collection of those. And I teach these classes but sometimes I don't listen to what I teach. And I had a great aunt that married someone, and she married him after the 1860 census, and he died before 1870. And she had 2 children in the 1870 census. Silly me, I assumed they were her children. One was, and one was his from a former marriage. And I didn't know, he had a fairly common name. His name was James McCullough, and there were 3 of them in Armstrong County. And I didn't know which one she married. And darned if when I looked at the orphan court records, all the information was right there. Name of the first wife, the names of the children, the older child that was with her in the census was not biologically hers, but even his death certificate has her listed as the mother because it was the only mother he ever knew. He was a baby when his mother died. So
Ellie has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Do you have any information about how the Finding Your Roots PBS show works? And it seems the people that are used and interviewed and their ancestors are searched are generally celebrities, particularly in performing arts, movies and such. So
because
how much do they charge the subjects, and how much would it cost? It's so expensive, I can imagine, with the genealogical record search and also with the scientific DNA and such, those searches.
Well, there's people that do it for free. And then, it used to be, I would tell you this, the standard rate's probably around $40 an hour, but I think it's gone up since that then. But there's a site on Facebook, for example, called the Search Squad, where you're looking for your biological parents, say you were adopted. They do everything for free. There are people that like to do this stuff. So
what was that called?
The Search Squad.
Search Squad. Thank you.
Yeah. But I'm sure that the people that they're doing on Finding Your Roots, they're trying to have a product that people will be interested in watching, that they're not paying for that. They probably even provide them with the DNA test. My dog is in a research study, and she's a standard poodle, and I paid for a standard poodle, and she's brown and big and curly, and she looks like a standard poodle. They contacted me and said, would I do a DNA test on her if they sent me the product? And I said, sure, but why? Well, here's what they've told me so far, that there's 99.9% chance that she's a poodle, that she's brown, and that she's curly. I could send you a picture and you would know that. I'm sure they got other information from it than that, but it just made me laugh.
Oh, look. Hey, Bill, that's something for you to do. Add to your genealogy stuff.
Yes, I understand Ancestry now has a animal DNA test. I haven't tried it yet, but yeah, one of my friends has done that, and they were a little bit disappointed because they paid for a dog they thought was a certain breed, and it turned out it's a mix of a variety of dogs, although it looks the same. And Sue, one other thing too, not to interject, but that lady that asked about Find Your Roots, I've been reading recently, they're going to change their format and start doing ordinary people.
Oh. I bet they're still not charging though, because.
Oh, I'm sure they're not either. I would agree with that. But I found someone in my computer club that helped me with my genealogy. And I think I mentioned that before, is that I had a grandmother that sort of fit what Sue was alluding to in her presentation. There was a number of things that were completely wrong, that her graveside had her nickname and her married name on the tombstone. And I searched for years trying to break that and was unable to do so. And apparently, because I didn't know much about genealogy at the time, I was kind of overlooking some of the clues. Well, one of the people in my computer club was able to crack the code, and they found out her name was Ali Daw. On her tombstone, it was Ida, and her married name was James. Well, come to find out, her correct name was Ali Daw Hollier. And so that's how I was able to find my grandmother. But those clues that Sue mentioned is that, things just really go awry. Here's a tombstone that you're looking for, and you have a nickname and a married name. Not a good combination.
Mhm.
Or you have Mrs. J.R. Jones is even better.
Oh, yes, that is. Yeah, yeah. I've seen some of those also.
Any questions? Any comments? You are always so thorough. Thank you very much.
Wait,
And
I got to see somebody with a hand up there, a real hand. Jay Owens.
Don't
He's
forget-
muted.
the chat box is right there for you to,
He's unmuted now.
Um,
oh, he's gonna walk
Go
us
ahead.
off too.
and
Go
so
ahead.
for whatever, Ms. Mueller, anything you recommend? Right,
Recommend.
right now I'm in a town called Covina in Southern California. Used to live in Escondido, and the local Mormon church there had a very, very good section on genealogy, a place to do research, actually. And I guess I could check that out here.
Yeah, and they're very, very helpful too.
Yeah, there were.
They know their stuff. And if they don't know the answer, they will get it for you. They will, get somebody that knows it.
Thank you.
I would ask the people at the front desk if they know of any places where you can do a little research or look at something. Covina's got a couple of places around it. There's Mount Sac, and there's other colleges that they might do it. They have a good library, and just tell them you're 1,000 years old and you really appreciate the help.
Thank you.
I know, I happen to know Joel, okay?
Okay.
Anyway, Richard, you're on from Australia.
Yeah, I'll just comment. So I highly recommend that you set up your accounts in both Family Search and Find a Grave. And one of the good things about Family Search is it indexes the records from Find a Grave and Billion Graves. So you could use them as references in your Family Search records. And they all integrate with each other very nicely.
Yep, Ancestry also, Ancestry owns Find a Grave, so they also index Find a Grave.
Very good. Any more comments, questions? We got our person here to answer them. Okay, Richard was our last word. John, walk us off. Thank you, Sue, as usual. Absolutely fantastic. And you guys are gonna get some really neat handouts from her too.